All right, well, we'll jump straight into it. So I'm kind of excited about doing this one today because doing this one today means that gyms are beginning to open up again. How cool is that? It's been 12, 13 weeks of training from our bedrooms, training from our back decks, training with limited fitness equipment, but hopefully we're going to start kind of dripping back into training now. And within the next couple of weeks, we're going to start being able to play with a little bit more equipment, a few more exercises here and there. So really trying to talk today about what it's going to take to regain some of our muscle, what type of training we can do, well, we probably should be doing, and how to map and how to enjoy it and avoid injury, and how to match our nutrition to those particular goals. All right, so we will dive straight into it. So thanks for joining me as always. We'll start straight away by saying, the time's almost upon us. Gyms are gradually starting to reopen. Finally, we'll be reunited with our favorite fitness equipment, some of our spaces, our favorite coaches and communities. And alas, we will be reunited, hopefully, with some progress and gains. Obviously, we all want to hit the ground running, or lifting as the case may be. We're probably going to want to crush our workouts and get some fast progress. And that's absolutely understandable. Whilst it's understandable, obviously it's exciting to try and get back into the gym. I'm going to, caution everybody that rushing back into a lot of work in the gym can be a pretty bad idea, and B, give reasons why it's just not necessary, which, let me say that again, rushing back into the gym can be a bad idea, and it really isn't necessary to be able to remake some gains and gain back either lost muscle or remake some progress. It's just not necessary, which should really feel like a great weight off your shoulders, because you just don't need to bury yourself in the gym. And we'll talk a little bit more as to why today. All right. So beyond any, enjoyment of crippling soreness and fatigue, if you're into that kind of thing, there's just no need to do it. All right. So we'll talk a little bit more. So how much training is actually necessary to regain muscle? So the great news is that muscle is in fact quite easy to regain. I'll use that word again, regain. So new muscle is incredibly tough. And building that new muscle, it can be incredibly tough to do, especially if we're more advanced in our training career. So just putting down the building blocks of new muscle is a really hard process, right? We need to be able to eat enough. We need to be able to train hard enough with the right weights, with the right volumes, put enough stress on the system, and we need to be able to recover from that. That's not the same as regaining, let's call, lost muscle. So however strong you were, say you could deadlift 300 pounds pre-quarantine, you're not going to be able to walk straight back into the gym and do that. But the opportunity for you to regain that strength, and regain that muscle mass that allows you to be able to do that is not that big of a job. So again, I'll say that again, it's not that big of a job. Again, alarm bells should be going off in your head, well, not alarm bells, but kind of confetti should be going off in your head saying, thank God for that. That's great news. I don't have to go and crush myself and bury myself in the gym. So this tells us that as much as we might want a soul-crushing first workout back to really kind of feel that value of kind of bury ourselves, and everybody enjoys a kind of a sadistic workout, at least the people that I know, at least, and myself included, we don't actually need to train like a maniac to get quick progress. If you want to train harder, then I'm not here to tell you obviously not to. Your gains will come a little faster, or may come a little faster, but here's the kicker. One of the biggest predictors of injury risk is a rapid jump in training volume. And by volume, I'm talking both about sets and reps and weight on the bar. So if you're used to training with 10 sets of a given muscle group per week, let's say you've been doing 10 sets of, 10 body weight squats, jumping back in and doing 12 will create just enough of a disturbance that you'll probably be able to recover from it, and you'll get some good stimulus, you'll get some good adaptation, and that's kind of ideal, right? If, however, your quarantine training is consisted of 3 sets of 10 bodyweight squats, and now you want to do 5 sets of 10 back squats with 135 pounds, that's an enormous jump, not just in training volume, immediate training volume, but it's also a drastic increase in the load as well on your back and the position of that load, right? So that the stress angles across the muscles are completely different as well. So with that, drastically increases the likelihood of injury, not just to your muscles, but to your joints and your connective tissues as well, not to mention the debilitating soreness. Now, if you go in on Monday and you smash yourself into the ground on Monday, and you can't walk for Tuesday, Wednesday, and you can just about do some stuff on Thursday, that's 2 wasted training days. And just because this really big disturbance has happened doesn't mean that you've actually made any gains from it, right? It just means that you had to like basically white knuckle it and hold on for dear life. It doesn't mean you learned anything or your body adapted to that stress. It's far more reasonable to work moderately hard with a moderate weight and a moderate volume. And moderate obviously is subjective to person as to what that feels like moderate for them. And we'll talk a little bit more about sets and reps in a minute. But you just don't need to go in and crush yourself. You can if you want to, but understand that the risks are going to go through the roof. You're going to get far more likely to get injured, far more likely to have to take multiple days, so training days off, which is ultimately just a waste of time. It's a wasted opportunity where you could go back into the gym, pick up more weight, adapt, stress, adapt, stress, recover, adapt, stress, recover, adapt, stress, recover, adapt. So that's what we're trying to get to, right? We don't want to create so much stress that it takes us we do one of two things. It either takes us 5 days to recover, and at that point, there's no guarantee of adaptation, or we crush ourselves on Monday, then we go back into the gym and we do a subpar shitty workout on Tuesday, Wednesday. And again, that's just, all I'm doing is, again, increasing my opportunity to get injured because I just can't control ranges of motion. I can't control the load. I'm not progressively overloading it because I'm just too sore. I'm not driving any stimulus at that point. So again, it's just not necessary. And again, if you're looking to regain lost muscle, that's far easier than it is to build brand new muscle. All right. So though hard training is absolutely necessary to make progress, very hard training doesn't help speed up fat loss or muscle gain as much as maybe we think it does. In fact, most of our fat loss, let's say for example, I've gained 5 pounds during my during quarantine because I've just been lower on the general activity scale throughout the day. Most of that regaining of the muscle will help us, just general regaining of muscle and general training will help us just start breaking down some of that fat and using it for energy, whilst making a couple of tweaks here and there in our diet and in our daily activity as things around us begin to open up, not just gyms as well, but as things around us begin to open up, we're just going to be able to go for a walk a little bit more. We're going to walk to the grocery store. We're going to spend a little bit more time outside. It's also luckily summer where, it's not like we're having to trudge through 6 feet of snow to get places. Like, it's naturally occurring. It forces us to be outside. So we're going to build up some more of that kind of general NEAT, that non-exercise activity thermogenesis, as it's known, just general daily activity, which is going to help us burn a few extra calories and just start making a dent in some of the body fat that we might have gained during quarantine. All right. So staying on how much training is actually necessary to regain muscle. So one of the biggest problems that, as I said, I've talked to people about is that NEAT, that general movement throughout the day. So it's going to be quite easy to get back into just burning a few extra calories. Like, I usually walk to and from the gym every morning with the dog pre-quarantine. Right now, I've not been doing that. So I've been missing out on about an hour's worth of general walking a day, which is about 300 calories. 300 calories that cost me no extra energy because it's just walking. And I really don't notice a major difference in terms of hunger or, I'm huffing and puffing where I feel like I need to recover from it. But it burns 300 extra calories, which makes kind of losing body fat that I might have gained during quarantine a million times easier. Okay. So ultimately, what does this look like in action? So how do we get back to training, avoiding injury, getting results, and go back to enjoying training as well? Like, part of the reason that we're really excited to get back to training is because we bloody love it. Gives us great feelings. We get great results. We enjoy it. We feel like we're contributing to our overall health and fitness. There's so many positives. So from an exercise standpoint, you might want to jump right back under the barbell and load that sucker up. Again, ultimately, it's not necessary. It's definitely not smart. But again, let me reiterate, it's not necessary to just like start piling extra weight on your back and do 1,000 reps, because that doesn't speed up muscle growth. And it's not reasonable from where you're starting, or from where a lot of people are starting right now, which is pretty low training volume, pretty low load, a lot less general activity. If you quadruple your training load, your training volume, and your overall general activity all at once, you're going to crush yourself and you're just not going to be able to recover from it, right? So again, I'll go back to using the kind of system we talked about before, which is stimulate, stress, train, do those things. So stimulus, we've got to recover. If we don't recover, we will never adapt. So all we'll do is just keep putting stress on top of the work that we're doing. and we won't actually get anywhere from it. We'll just kind of be spinning our wheels. If anything, we'll probably go backwards. So how do we know? A good question is, how do we know how much work or how much stimulus is enough that I can actually recover from it and make adaptations from it? So a great indicator is performance. A performance indicator simply just means if on day one I do 3 sets of 10 at the bench press at 135, if I train it again tomorrow and I do 3 sets of 10 at 135, but I actually am really struggling, I can only get out 3 sets of 9, my performance has suffered, right? It's not suffered dramatically, so it might still be within range where I can be making a little bit of progress. If I go to 3 sets of 8 at 135 of what I've done the week before, I'm ultimately I'm not recovering from that stimulus, and therefore I'm not adapting. I'm not getting any stronger, right? So a performance indicator is a great way to look at it. You can start by putting, if you do bench press on Monday, you might take a day off on Tuesday and then do bench press again on Wednesday. If that's just not enough time and your performance is still hitting the pan and it's still going down, then you need to give it a little more time, option number 1. Or option number 2, you decrease the stimulus in the first place. So it gives you more opportunity to recover from it in a shortest time span. So maybe you do 115 on the bench press for 3 sets of 10 on Monday. Next week, take Tuesday off, and if you can do 3 sets of 10 at 115 again on Wednesday, then maybe that's a better load on the bar, something that's more reasonable in terms of intensity for you to actually be able to recover from it on a day-to-day basis, and then therefore train it more frequently. You might just be starting ahead of yourself, right? Which that's going to be a hard thing to separate your ego, or our ego in general, from that when we first go back into the gym, because we're going to say, hey, I've deadlifted 300 pounds in the past. Why can't I just go in and rock it today? I'll go at 290. You could probably go at 290, but tomorrow everything will hurt like hell, and you just won't be able to recover from it within 2 or 3 days, right? So you might be able to like white knuckle it and just hold on for dear life and push through it and be like, yeah, I deadlifted 300 pounds. I did that 6 weeks ago. I'm just as strong as I was. But strength is not only measured by weight on the bar or reps performed, but it's how well can you recover from that stimulus, right? So if pre-quarantine you could deadlift 5 days in a row, 300 pounds, and you were fine, that is ultimately, you were more advanced then than if you can't do that again now, right? Even if you can actually lift 300 pounds still on the bar, if you can't recover from it as easily, you're not as well trained, and therefore, there's no point in continuing to pile more shit on top of shit, is the nicest possible way I can put it. So when it comes to exercises, as I said, you might want to jump straight back under a barbell, but you just don't need to. Definitely find something that's enjoyable, potentially different from the exercises that you've been doing during quarantine. So I know there's a lot of people that we've been working with right now that, we've been training predominantly with kettlebells. If you've been doing kettlebell swings, presses, RDLs, every variation of exercise you could ever possibly imagine with a kettlebell, when you first go back into the gym, you might not want to look at a kettlebell for the next 6 weeks, and that's absolutely fine. 2 reasons. 1, probably more enjoyable to train with something different. And also from a novel stimulus standpoint, training with a slightly different implement will challenge your muscles in that same, let's say you've been doing goblet squats with a kettlebell. If you now go and do heels elevated, offset squats with a dumbbell, yeah, then you're still squatting, you're still bending your knees, you're still doing the same movement pattern, but just creating a little bit of novelty in the stimulus is going to, as I said, both be more enjoyable, and at the same time, you're going to get some novel stimulus, some novel results from it. You're probably going to create a little bit of a disturbance in the muscle and therefore be able to recover from it. But if you overdo that and you've been doing bodyweight squats and then you go straight under a barbell at 200 pounds, you're definitely going to overdo that stimulus. And there's no chance that you're going to be able to recover from it. All right. So that's in terms of exercises. Definitely select things that you enjoy, but be smart with how you load them. When it comes to weight, heavy weight typically has a higher risk of injury. It's just as a general rule of thumb. So if we're ever progressing people in the gym, even if there's pre-quarantine, even if they've been training with us for a long, long time, the variables that get changed are going to be, we pick an exercise, we overload it in terms of volume, then we overload it in terms of load, then we'll overload it in terms of specificity or changing of the exercise. We'll go right back when we change the exercise, we'll bring it back down, we'll overload it in terms of volume, overload it in terms of load, change the exercise potentially, or we just go back down and train more volume at a higher weight. So weight is the last variable to change. So go in and do the exercise. maybe add 1 or 2 more reps per set, or keep the reps the same and just add 1 or 2 more sets total per session. But do not be tempted to just go start slamming more and more plates onto the bar, because it's not going to be beneficial for you. You're not going to recover from it. You're going to get so debilitatingly sore, most likely, that regardless of the exercise that you do, you're just not going to recover from it. And your injury risk is not, it doesn't run concurrently with progress. Your injury risk from weight on the bar goes through the absolute roof. You know, actually one of the safest training modalities is actually bodybuilding, because most bodybuilders don't put enough weight on the bar to actually be able to train in a high injury risk. On the other hand, powerlifting has an incredibly high injury risk because they don't train volume too often, but they do train a hell of a lot of load. And therefore, you know, we see injury risk go up through the roof. Load just has an exponentially higher risk factor in terms of injury than volume does. Okay, so just bear that in mind when it comes to going back into the gym. And, you know, if you're looking to progress, whether you're doing a small group class or whether you're doing personal training or whether you're just training on your own, doesn't matter. You know, be mindful that it's not about just trying to slide 5 pounds more on per week. Try and maybe slide 1 more rep in per week, or 1 more total set at the end of, you know, your 4-week mesocycle or something like that. All right. So we want to find a moderate rep range potentially. So that's around 8 to 10. And we want to match that with a moderate load. That's around that's 8 to 10 reps, the moderate rep range. And then we want to find that with a moderate load. So obviously moderate load is specific to person. So I usually describe that as a 7 or an 8 out of 10. That's a moderate load. Really, you could train at around 60% of your max effort as you come back into the gym. And we know this because there's been a multitude of studies done for it, but around 60% of your max, or your 1 rep max, or your max effort will still yield strength results, hypertrophy results. It will still yield progress in terms of, kind of strength gains in the gym. All right. So at a minimum, you could train at around 6 out of 10. Push that a little harder, definitely add a little bit more stimulus in between 7 and 8 out of 10, but you don't need to be training in the 9 and 10, like, holy shit, crap your pants kind of like gut busting moments. If that's where you're training at, your risk of injury again is going to go much, much higher, because you're going to be working beyond technical fatigue and beyond muscular fatigue. Both, once you can't control that load through that range of motion anymore, you know, risk goes through the roof. Okay. At the same time, joints and connective tissue don't keep up with muscular soreness the same way. So if I can stress my muscle can likely recover far, far quicker. Well, it's not likely. My muscle can recover from a stress far quicker than my joints and my connective tissue can, right? Simply just because they're made of different things. Like, think of it this way. If you've ever broken your arm, it takes 4 to 6 weeks in a cast to remold that bone. If you've ever pulled a muscle, it takes 6 to 8 weeks to kind of be able to go back and run on that muscle again. If you've ever torn a ligament, that's 12 weeks out, right? That's 12 weeks kind of out of commission. And that's because different cells turn over at different times and they repair at different rates. It's not all going to be created equally, right? So if I find an exercise that gives me a novel stimulus in my muscle, I have to be mindful that putting more weight on the bar next week might still give me that novel stimulus, but the joint tissue and the connective tissue around my joints are not going to tolerate that stress or recover from that previous stress as well as muscle tissue will do. So bear that in mind. You know, you have to kind of, quote unquote, listen to your body. I think that's probably one of my most hated fitness statements there, but you do have to be mindful that if you've got a really big pump in your biceps doing bicep curls, but you haven't done bicep curls for 6 weeks, going back and doing it again tomorrow might give you another great pump in your biceps. But on day 3, you'll be walking around kind of like this because you just won't be able to extend your arm through a full range of motion anymore, because your bicep tendons will just feel like crap, right? So it's about staggering your exercise selection out throughout the time as you come back into training. All right. Stick with exercises, kind of simple exercises, or the same exercises, the same rep range, and a similar intensity for about 4 to 6 weeks, the first 4 to 6 weeks, and just play with the load and volume in small increments. So if after 4 weeks you feel like you're getting a little bit stronger in that original exercise that you were doing, sure, go ahead and slide 5 pounds on. If you can do that same quality of work, remember we're looking at, is your performance improving, or can your performance improve, or can you recover from that stress? without getting a degrading factor onto your performance, then great, you're probably getting a little bit stronger and your body can tolerate that stress. But again, don't rush into doing it. Janet, one of our members, asked me a few weeks ago now, can a muscle get stronger without it getting bigger? Absolutely it can, right? And that comes through kind of neurological firing. So I've already got this tissue in my arm. I can make it more efficient by getting it to fire more efficiently, fire stronger, you know, get its organization of how its nerves and how its muscle fibers fire. Now, so that simply comes down to just practicing a movement pattern versus just adding more weight or more sets and reps onto the bar as well, right? So you can still be getting improvements in performance, still be getting improvements in strength without actually having to throw more weight on the bar. Can you do the same thing but better? If so, that's also progress, right? We don't just have to constantly progressively overload. Obviously, progressive overload in terms of sets, reps, load, volume, all that stuff, that's a big precursor as to whether we're getting stronger, or it's a big kind of marker as to whether we're getting stronger, getting bigger, whatever the goal is. But also at the same time, right back in the early stages of coming back into training, can you just do the same work with less effort? Massive progress, right? If that's the case and you're like, hey, week 1 this absolutely battered me, and week 4 I feel fine, like I could go again, I could do another 2-3 sets, then fine, go ahead, add another 2-3 sets, right? But pay attention to that flag, that marker in your body, which is like, yeah, I can definitely do the same work but better. Maybe now is the time to add 1 or 2 more sets. Maybe now is the time after 4 to 6 weeks to go ahead and add another 5 pounds onto the bar, all right? So yeah, we absolutely want to avoid kind of re-injuring our shoulder or tweaking our back. You know, stick with our sets, reps, exercises, and our loads for at least 4 weeks. And then when it comes to progressively overloading things, think about sets and reps first, or reps and sets first. And if you can still do that, then you can start sprinkling little bits of extra weight in there, but just be patient, all right? So if you've not trained that much through quarantine, you really don't need much volume or load to regain the muscle mass. And oftentimes the way I describe this to people is, the saying goes, it's like riding a bike. You never forget, right? Somebody said that to you before, like, you know, it's like riding a bike. You never forget. Once you learn, you always remember how to. And that's a fantastic saying, and it definitely applies to training as well. Remember, the saying is not, it's like riding a bike for 100 miles as fast as you can, you never forget. Now, just because you once were able to ride a bike as fast as you can for 100 miles doesn't mean that you can just jump straight back into trying to do that very same thing again. Intensity of the effort and intensity of the workload, however it's organized through sets, reps, and load on the bar and exercise selection, you know, we're not going to be able to just transport ourselves back to pre-quarantine and be able to do exactly the same thing. So don't be under that illusion. Definitely try and break that mindset right now. Convince yourself over the next few days that, you know, it's just not necessary, nor is it realistic, and it will come at some massive costs, okay? So sometimes we'll talk about MEV, which is your minimum effective volume. Now, your minimum effective volume, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier on, around 60% of what you used to be able to do in terms of sets, reps, and weight on the bar is enough to start re-stimulating and regaining progress and regaining, you know, strength, size, mass, whatever it might be, pretty quickly. You know, letting our ego drive the training process is a fool's errand. And again, I can't stress it enough. The last thing you need to do is get so debilitatingly sore that you need to take 2 or 3 days off, or get injured and you have to take multiple weeks off, okay? Because nothing's going to bum you out more than wanting to go to the gym, going back to the gym, getting injured, and not being able to go back to the gym again for 3 weeks, right? And it's really going to stunt long-term progress as well, because you have to keep constantly restarting. So make sure that as you restart smart, all right? So the last thing we'll talk about for the next 6 or so minutes is matching our nutrition to our training, okay? So really, I came at this with the understanding that most people's goal is most likely to rebuild or building muscle. The reason that is even if that's not your primary goal, like let's say, for example, your primary goal is performance, or your primary goal is fat loss or body composition change, building muscle is ultimately the cornerstone of all of those things, right? If we can build good quality muscle mass, it allows us to improve our performance, whether we're a long distance runner or a football player, it doesn't matter. Okay, if we can improve our muscle mass, we have a better opportunity or a better chance or a more efficient chance of burning more calories and therefore being able to, lower our body fat. Or we have a better opportunity to be able to grow more muscle and therefore become more muscular if our goal is to add lean muscle mass, right? So the main cornerstone of the idea here is that building lean muscle mass is going to be prevalent in pretty much any goal across the board, especially as we come back in through outside of quarantine, I'm sorry. So the silver lining is that quarantine has likely been a forced period of low physical stress. I'm not saying it hasn't been a high period of mental stress, but it's been low physical stress. And what I mean by that is that you just probably haven't been able to leave the house as much. You've not been able to train. You've not been able to crush yourself in the gym. You've not been able to go out and, go on crazy hikes, something that you might have done without quarantine. And you've likely gained total physiological system recovery. So if we train 5 days a week pre-quarantine, again, if we're training 5 days a week, we're likely recovering on a necessary basis, but we're never getting total system recovery, and that's fine. The way I described this is I listened to a podcast earlier on in the week, and it was a great analogy, and that's why I'm going to steal it and use it, which was, total system recovery is not always absolutely necessary, and because think about like a chef. Total system recovery for a chef is every time you make a single meal, you completely close the kitchen down and you clean everything rather than just knock a couple of crumbs out of the way and go back again. It's not actually absolutely necessary that we have to shut everything down and completely reset everything before we go in and make another stress or make another, kind of adaptive change in terms of training. That's just not necessary. But it is important to have periods like that where we do get total system recovery. And over the last 12 weeks, you've probably had an opportunity to get more total system recovery than, at any other point in your life, most likely in your adult life. So bearing that in mind, that right now you've probably, you've recovered from a lot of physical stress that you might have been putting on yourself in the gym prior to this. So in the early phases of returning to the gym, simply just thinking about potentially eating at a maintenance volume. So what I mean by a maintenance volume is an isocaloric volume. So let's say, for example, it takes me 2,000 calories to do all my daily functions throughout the day. And then I maybe eat 500 more calories because I've trained. So I'm basically eating the same amount of calories that I'm burning throughout any of my daily functions, including training. So the reason it's important to potentially think about eating at maintenance is that for the few short weeks at the start of this period, even more reason to not get injured, the few short weeks, you might actually be able to gain muscle and burn fat simultaneously, which is something that pretty much the holy grail, it's the golden nugget. People are always searching for that. And if you're quite advanced in your training, you're not necessarily going to be able to get that all the time. But during this phase, as you resensitize back to training, you don't have to drop your calories a ton to make the most of your training. If anything, keeping your calories the same and just increasing your output is actually going to allow you to be able to build that muscle back that we've just been talking about, whilst potentially creating a little bit of a deficit here and there, and understanding how we can more efficiently burn calories or use energy, whether specifically if our goal is body composition change or body fat loss. Okay, so think about it. For the next 4 weeks, you really just have to, yes, you can't eat like an arsehole, you still have to eat like an adult. But if you don't have to put any dietary stress on yourself, where you can think, I have to be able to create a 500 calorie deficit every single day, you actually don't need that. At first, what you need is to be able to support your regaining of muscle mass. And the byproduct of regaining that muscle mass means that you will likely burn some body fat down the road, like within that period of time as well. So it's really, again, it's really important now that we, A, don't get injured, B, we don't crush ourselves and miss out on training days. The goal is to train pretty frequently, an intensity that we can control and can recover from, and eat reasonably normally. Again, can't eat like a 12-year-old. We have to eat like an adult, which means we've probably got to lay off the Pop-Tarts here and there. We probably need to start getting a little bit more organized with our food, but making some tweaks here and there. But we don't need to be doing everything all at once. We don't need to jump back into the gym and crush ourselves under a barbell and be making massive caloric deficits on a day-to-day basis. It's just not necessary. So once you've regained your lost muscle, or potentially even added some extra muscle, which would be a great goal, by eating at maintenance in your first 4 to 6 weeks of training, you'll be back, if not ahead of the curve, you'll be back to where you were, and you'll be sans injury you'll have avoided a ton of nutritional stresses because you won't have had to think about, like, cutting out a ton of food or actually creating a massive caloric deficit. And you'll have enjoyed, like, the reintroduction to the training stimulus, because really reintroduction to the gym is going to give you a ton of novelty, which is quite enjoyable for most people. It depends on what you like, I guess, but it's quite enjoyable for most people. You're going to go back into a place that you previously loved and missed, people that you're going to see, coaches that you're going to work with, times that you're going to get to train at. You're going to regain a little bit of normalcy. You don't need to crush yourself and therefore have debilitating soreness, because that's not a great indicator of progress, if any progress whatsoever. Stimulus is an indicator of progress. Fatigue is a byproduct. Fatigue is not what we're chasing. Stimulus is what we're chasing. And there is a dose response to stimulus, right? We can have too much stimulus and therefore have way too much fatigue. We're looking for the right amount of stimulus. So we talked about sets and reps and weight on the bar to get that best stimulus, okay? And then performance as an indicator as to whether the stimulus is right or enough or not enough. So hopefully that gives you a good amount of context, and hopefully that gives you kind of, my rules aren't gospel by no means, but these aren't really rules. It's just facts. It's just facts. It's what you can do, and it's what you can get away with. And I think of the 20 people that I've ended up seeing this today, probably 18 of you will heed that, and 2 people will absolutely crush themselves in the gym. Don't be one of those 2 people. If you have any questions or want any further explanation about anything we've gone through today, by all means, shoot me an email. It's j@ethosfit.com, or you can DM me here, send a question, send a message, whatever you need to do. I look forward to seeing you all back in the gym over the next few weeks. Even if you don't come to our gym, best of luck going back to the gym. Enjoy it. I'm probably going to keep doing these workshops for as long as people come to them. It's a great opportunity for me to see you guys and kind of teach. It's also a great opportunity for me to kind of sharpen my skills and deliver them to people as well. So at the same time, if you liked this, please tell other people about it, share it, do whatever you need to do. Do me a solid, let other people see it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I'm going to say peace.